My name is Danica, and today I want to talk about my top reads of 2018. I have to start with an apology because 2 years ago I made a video in which I ranted about people doing their best 16 books of 2016. Now, I thought it was ridiculous that people kept extending their best of list to match the year because it was just going to keep going on forever and the lists were going to get longer and longer. And then the next year I did my top 17 of 2017 because when I made my list it just happened to be 17 books. And this year I put together a list of the books that I read this year that I want to talk about, and it turned out to be 18 books, and I didn't want to cut any of them out because I really wanted to talk about each one of them. So of course it worked out that way that I have to eat my words and do exactly what I complained about a few years ago. So here it is, my top 18 of 2018. I'll try to get through them pretty quickly because I know this is a ridiculously long list, but I read about 100 books this year and I just had quite a few that I really wanted to talk about, especially because I haven't been making a lot of videos this year and a lot of these books I haven't really mentioned before and I want people to know about them. This is basically in order from my 18th favorite book to my #1 favorite book. Really loved all of these. I recommend all of these. It doesn't really matter where it falls in the ranking, but just for fun, I'm counting down to #1. So my number 18 read was The Body Is Not an Apology, The Power of Radical Self-Love by Sonia Renee Taylor. I've read some other fat positive books, but I really loved how this book didn't just talk about fat positivity. It talks about how body hatred plays out on people of color's bodies and on people with disabilities and on queer bodies and trans bodies, and kind of connected all of those together to not just talk about a certain kind of body positivity, but to really talk about combating body hate in all of its different forms. It talks about how we have to examine how this body hatred is based in our culture and in our laws and how we can work to change that. I really would have loved to read this book as a teenager. I listened to the audiobook and I really enjoyed it, but I would have liked to be able to kind of stop and reread and spend a little bit longer on certain parts. So I kind of wish I had read it in a physical form for that reason. But she was a really great, engaging narrator, so I think either one would work really well. And next I have my first teaching book I've ever read, but I have a feeling it's going to be my favorite. It's called It Won't Be Easy, An Exceedingly Honest and Slightly Unprofessional Love Letter to Teaching by Tom Rademacher. I am currently in school to try to learn to be a high school English teacher, or hopefully a teacher librarian. That's the dream. So I've really been enjoying looking at different teacher vlogs and blogs and websites to see what it's actually like being a teacher. So I checked out this audiobook and I absolutely loved it. I liked that he was willing to talk about his own mistakes and some of the not so great things that he's seen in his teaching life. He talks about the best and the worst parts of teaching in a way that feels really honest, but mostly I loved this for its emphasis on anti-racism in teaching and how to do that as a white teacher and how to be kind of checking yourself for your biases and for things that you might not realize are racist, and just about continually learning and improving, and I really appreciated that. And then I have As the Crow Flies by Melanie Gilman. Melanie Gilman is one of my favorite artists, and I had been reading this as it came out in webcomic format, but I actually appreciated a lot more being able to read a large amount of it at once. I just love their art style. They use all colored pencils and they are such incredibly detailed and obviously time-consuming layout. This is about Charlie, who is a queer brown kid who finds herself at this basically a white feminist semi-Christian backpacking trip, and Charlie feels really out of place being one of the only people of color at this backpacking trip and also being queer, but she ends up making friends with another camper, Sydney, who is a trans girl who also feels out of place and like she has to be closeted to be on this trip and that she won't be welcome otherwise. So they end up commiserating. Honestly, my only complaint about this is that it is volume 1 and it ends kind of abruptly, and I really want volume 2, but otherwise I love everything about this. There is a review at the Lesbury that I will link below, and I have some of the pages in there, panels that I really enjoyed, so you should check out their review and see if those excerpts appeal to you because I highly recommend this one. Obviously I highly recommend everything in this video. And then there's Drumroll Please by Lisa Jen Bigelow. I love this cover. Lisa Jen Bigelow is the author of of one of my favorite queer young adult books, which is Silhouette of a Sparrow. So when she came out with this middle grade book, I had to pick it up and I loved it. It's about Melly, who is 13, and her parents just dropped her off at this music camp, and the day before they told her that they are getting divorced. So she is at this camp with her best friend, who's being kind of distant and just sort of like chasing after boys, and feels really angry and alone and isn't sure how to process this big information. It ends up being a little bit of a love story with another girl at the camp. I just really appreciated the complexity of the relationships here. Melly is trying to develop her own voice and find herself, but she has to balance advocating for herself without being cruel. It really just comes back to relationships are complicated and communication is really hard, and this doesn't try to simplify that. It shows how you can be in the wrong from one perspective and in the right from another perspective. So this definitely lived up to her other book. And then I actually have a picture book, and it's called Lovely by Jess Hong, and I just loved this. It's so sweet. This book is about all the different kinds of people that can be called lovely. The page really made it for me. It shows someone who is wearing these elegant high heels, and they also have really hairy legs, and underneath is the caption fancy. I just love that. There's a lot of diversity here. The person who gets described as sporty is someone with a prosthetic leg. There are gender non-conforming people and people of color and someone in a wheelchair. And it says, lovely is different, weird, and wonderful. And I just thought it was so cute. I really enjoyed reading this. For number 13, appropriately, I have Toil and Trouble, 15 Tales of Women in Witchcraft, edited by Tess Sharp, which was exactly what I was looking for in an October read. It had so many different takes on the idea of witches. There are lots of queer witches. There are at least 5 stories that have a queer woman main character. This is definitely a feminist collection, and I just loved all of the different perspectives and the diversity here, and the idea of coming back to the kind of power that's represented in the cultural idea of witches and witchcraft. So it has anywhere from the fairy tale-ish idea of witches to the more modern idea of witches. So if you're interested in witches at all, definitely try this one out. And then I have actually the second picture book on this list, which is Not My Idea, a book about whiteness by Anastasia Higginbottom. And this is just something that I think is so necessary, and I've never seen another book like it, where it is talking about young white kids about the idea of whiteness. So it talks about white supremacy and racism and police shootings. It starts with a quotation from a Toni Morrison interview where she said, "White people have a very, very serious problem, and they should start thinking about what they can do about it. Take me out of it." So it teaches that white people are the ones who need to be fighting against the system of white supremacy. It says you can be white without signing on to whiteness, and it encourages people to grow justice inside of them. And as for the idea that kids are too young to learn about this, which of course is something that is probably only being applied to white kids, because kids of color are often not given a choice about whether they're going to be learning about this. Their response to that is, innocence is overrated, knowledge is power, get some, grow wise, make history. So I think this is such a necessary book that honestly most white adults could read and learn a lot from. Number 11 is Girl Made of Stars by Ashley Herring Blake. This is another one that I reviewed at the Lesbury, and I will link it down below because I have a lot of thoughts. This is a very difficult book. It's young adult, but it is about rape culture, and it's about Mara, and her best friend has accused her twin brother of rape, her twin that she is very close with, and it is basically about her trying to process this. She kind of splits and believes both of them at the same time. She doesn't want to believe that about her brother, but she also knows that her best friend isn't lying, and as she's trying to sort through this, her own unaddressed trauma starts to bubble up. It's a really uncomfortable read, but there is also the element of hope. There is both a backlash to Hannah, but she also finds some support and community. This also deals with Mara's relationship with her ex, who is non-binary, and about their kind of struggle to figure out the relationship that they have now. They went from being best friends to dating to breaking up, and they don't quite know who they are to each other anymore or why their relationship ended. I read this so quickly, partly because Ashley Herring Blake is an amazing author and because I was invested in the characters, but also honestly I wanted to finish it and be able to walk away from that story because it was so gutting, but it was also incredibly well done. I wouldn't really have trusted a lot of other authors with this premise, but I knew that Ashley Herring Blake would be able to do it justice, and she did. And then for something a lot lighter, there's The Prince and the Dressmaker by Jen Wang, which I don't even know how to talk about. It's just delightful. It's a middle grade graphic novel that is about a dressmaker who begins to secretly make dresses for the prince, who has kind of an alter ego and is closeted about this. It's a really sweet genderqueer love story slash coming of age story slash fashion extravaganza. I love that there's so many more queer and trans stories that are coming out for a middle grade audience, because for a long time that was something that no one was doing. So I'm really glad that that is a niche that's starting to be filled. And breaking into my top 10, number 9 is All Out, the no longer secret stories of queer teens throughout the ages, edited by Sandra Mitchell. So this is optimistic historical fiction. It locates queer teens throughout time and in a variety of places, and it also gives them a happy ending. It rejects the idea that queer people don't have a history, or that if they do, it is fundamentally tragic. There are a lot of different time periods, though I wish that more of them had taken place outside of North America and Europe. My favorite story was Melinda Lowe's, and that one is being made into a novel, which I'm so excited for. But I also love Dahlia Adler's, which is a love story about two girls who get together at Kurt Cobain's vigil. And I really liked all of the stories. There wasn't anything that I felt like was a dud. So this is another YA collection that I thought was really strong. And then I accidentally read this book and then Girl Made of Stars back to back, which was a terrible idea, but this is Not That Bad, Dispatches from Rape Culture by Roxane Gay. This is a book that is so hard to read emotionally. It is a range of subjects, so it kind of deals with anything from an isolated case of sexual harassment and how that impacted that individual to people dealing with really horrible, traumatic rape. I don't know how to describe it other than brutal and gutting. I think it's necessary because it's true and it is talking about something that is incredibly important, but it was also very difficult to get through. All of the entries were really well written and were compelling, but the subject matter is obviously very dark, so you would know best whether it's something that you're able to read and deal with. If it is something that you feel like you can handle, I do think it's very eye-opening and important, but it was definitely one of the hardest books for me to read this year. I feel like so many of the books on this list I'm describing as brutal and gutting. Apparently that's what I look for from a good book, is for it to emotionally destroy me, because the next one that I'm going to talk about is Anger is a Gift by Marco Shiro. I love Marco Shiro's writing. I've been reading his site since he was talking about Harry Potter, so for many years, so I wouldn't expect any less from him, but this book still blew me away. It is a breath of fresh air to read a book that is mostly made up of people of color, and most of them are queer. He has a friends group that includes trans characters, non-binary characters, lesbian, gay, bisexual characters. It also deals a lot with Moss's anxiety and his self-esteem issues in a really realistic way. But this is primarily a story about police brutality and murder by police. Moss is Black and his father was killed unarmed by police, and his anxiety and PTSD has to do with that and is triggered by police presences or just hearing sirens. He goes back to that moment, and it's talking about the increased police presence at his school and how it is becoming more and more like a jail. And it's him and his friends group trying to fight back against that and the enormous resistance that they face. I really want to warn that it does have some content that could be really triggering for people. I think it's a good idea to kind of inform yourself about that if you are worried that it might be particularly triggering for you. But it is incredibly powerful and it is still hopeful, and Marco Giro is just such an incredible writer, and I look forward to reading anything else he ever writes. And then I have another Ashley Herring Blake book, which was the first book I read from her, and that's How to Make a Wish. And this book deals with grief and with unhealthy or even abusive family relationships. So Grace's father died when she was young, and ever since then she's felt like she had to be the parent figure to her mother, Maggie, and had to keep her safe. She doesn't get that kind of support from her mother. And this is, again, a book where I feel like the relationships are so complex and nuanced. Grace's best friend, Luca, and his mother are a constant source of support for her, and they have recently taken in a family member, Eva, whose mother has just died. And Grace and Eva start to begin to have a relationship. In the meantime, Maggie has taken Eva under her wing, and Grace is dealing with all of these emotions about it, that she kind of resents Eva for her mother being a mother figure to her, but not to her own daughter. And she also feels like she needs to warn Eva about who her mother really is, and that she can be really dangerous and irresponsible, and that maybe Eva shouldn't be relying on her. So it deals with grief and abuse, and also a bisexual love story, and yes, it uses the word bisexual, and it also has examinations of race and art, because Eva is a black ballet dancer. So this was definitely a 5-star read for me, and it was the reason that I immediately went out and picked up one of her other books. So finally, getting away from some of these really difficult books, I read Space Battle Lunchtime. All ages, queer lady comics are one of my favorite things to read, and one of my favorite things to watch are reality baking shows. So this comic is an all ages queer woman graphic novel about a reality cooking/baking competition set in space. Like, what else could you possibly want from a book? And I will say that I finished volume 1 thinking, okay, this is pretty strong subtext, but technically isn't this just queer subtext? So if you finish volume 1 thinking that, definitely start volume 2, because it's not subtext. It becomes very textual in the second volume. It's just so cute and fun, and there's lots of hijinks and over-the-top action. The romance is sweet. It really filled that kind of cotton candy happy niche that I needed, because clearly I just alternate between very sweet happy stories and brutally difficult books. And then for number 3, I have the most soothing book I have ever read, which is The Tea Dragon Society by Katie O'Neill, the same author as Princess Ever After. This one is also queer. There are 2 men who are in a relationship, and then possibly some subtext between the 2 girls who form a really close relationship. But I absolutely love the art style in this. It's so intricate. There's tons of little details. I loved the differing layouts. And also it just has tea dragons, which are these tiny dragons that you raise. They grow little tea leaves on their heads that, if you harvest, have like magical properties. Suffice to say, Tea Dragon Society is super cute, sweet, and soothing, and it has tiny little dragons, and I love it. My number 2 spot goes to The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I know everyone's been reading this and talking about it and loving it, and everybody is right. This is about Evelyn Hugo, who is an aging Hollywood starlet who has hired kind of an unknown journalist to write her life story. And Evelyn is such an interesting character. She is so complex and flawed. She has used people to get what she wanted out of life. She makes mistakes. She has to make some really difficult decisions. And I know that this is the kind of character that a lot of people will say is unlikable. Personally, I loved her. She is bisexual, and don't be fooled by the title, because she is very clear that the love of her life is a woman. I just loved how real and complicated this character felt. It also made me think about queer women in the 50s and how difficult that would be. Evelyn was privileged in a lot of different ways. She was rich and famous and white passing, but she was also trapped. She couldn't acknowledge the love of her life without losing everything that she had built. I listened to the audiobook, and I thought that was a great way to experience the story, even if it doesn't seem like the kind of book that you usually read. Old Hollywood is not something that I would immediately be drawn to, but this is so incredibly well written. I definitely think it's worth picking up, even if it's a little bit outside of your usual genre. And my number one pick for this year was Ragged Company by Richard Wagamese, and it is kind of about a group of homeless people who win the lottery, but it's also about a lot of other different things. It's about survivance, it's about reaching out and making connections with people, it's about moving through tragedy and dealing with your past even when you have been running from it for a long time. It's just a really great deep dive into these characters and the family that they have built together. It is about trauma. It deals with, again, some very dark, difficult things. This is an Indigenous author, and it also has several Indigenous main characters and talks about the kind of systemic racism that they experience in their lives and how that affects them. It is just incredibly well done. This is definitely the book that really got to me the most this year. I really felt so pulled into the story and into these people's emotional lives. This is just so well told that I want to read everything that he wrote. So I'll link the video review in case you want more about this one, but obviously I highly recommend it. It was my favorite book that I read this year. And those are my top 18 books of 2018. Let me know in the comments if you read any of these and what you thought of them, and if you have a yearly wrap-up, feel free to link that as well, and I will definitely check it out. I also want to give a shout out to my Patreon supporters like Jackie Plummer. Thank you so much for your support. Patrons really make it possible for me to make more content, and I really appreciate that, especially when trying to juggle school and work and all my online things. Patreon means that I can carve out a little more time for the library and this channel and everything else that I want to be doing online. If you're interested in supporting me on Patreon, you get lots of perks, including if you pledge $2 or more a month, you get added to the exclusive email list where I hold monthly giveaways for queer books. And once we hit $200 a month, I will be doing 2 of those every month, so you will have twice the chances to win. So thank you for watching, and thank you if you're a supporter on Patreon, or if you're a supporter by watching and liking and commenting and subscribing and doing all of those amazing things. And I hope you all had a good 2018 of reading. Thanks!